Middlemarch or Middlemarch, A Study of Provincial Life is a novel by George Eliot, a pseudonym of Marion Evans. It was published during 1871-72 in installments. Middlemarch is a historical novel and a tragedy written in the style of the 19th-century Victorian realist novel. It is set in 1829-32, in the fictional town of Middlemarch in the Midlands, England. It is from the third-person omniscient perspective. Before we start with the detailed summary, do like and subscribe. Each chapter starts with a small quotation from a variety of works by Chaucer, Dante, Shakespeare, John Milton, William Wordsworth, William Blake, and many others. These epigraphs serve as summarizing the ensuing chapter and moving the story forward. The 19-year-old Dorothea Brooke and her sister Celia, who are orphans, live with their bachelor uncle, Mr. Brooke, at Tipton Grange. Sir James Chettam is courting Dorothea, and during a dinner at Tipton, they are joined by Rev. Edward Casaubon, a 45-year-old scholar of theology, his extensive project, The Key to All Mythologies. Dorothea, passionate about designing cottages for Tipton's tenant farm workers, admires Casaubon, seeing him as a great man. While Sir James is excited about Dorothea's cottage plans, Casaubon shows little interest. Casaubon soon proposes to Dorothea through a formal and awkward letter. Overjoyed, Dorothea accepts, despite reservations from Mr. Brooke and their family friend Mrs. Cadwallader. Sir James is distressed by Dorothea's decision but remains her friend, continuing his visits to Tipton. During a visit to Casaubon's home, Lowick Manor, Dorothea, Celia, Mr. Brooke, and Casaubon meet Casaubon's cousin, Will Ladislaw. Later, a dinner party at Tipton precedes Dorothea and Casaubon's wedding. Among the guests is Tertius Lydgate, a young doctor new to Middlemarch aiming to introduce modern medical reforms. Lydgate is captivated by Rosamond Vincy, the town's beauty, while her brother Fred, lazy and proud, expects to inherit his wealthy uncle Mr. Featherstone's estate. Fred, who has borrowed money based on this expectation, is in love with Mary Garth, his childhood friend. Rosamond is determined to marry Lydgate to improve her social and financial standing. Bulstrode, a wealthy banker, funds the new hospital and appoints Lydgate as the director. Fred Vincy borrowed money for gambling from horse dealer Mr. Bambridge. He ends up with Caleb Garth co-signing the debt when Fred can't repay it. Lydgate is traumatized when he fell for Laure, an actress who killed her husband during a performance in Paris. Although charmed by Rosamond Vincy, Lydgate plans to delay marriage for 5 years to focus on his career. He befriends a vicar, Fairbrother. Though doubting Mr. Tyke for the chaplaincy at the new hospital, Lydgate votes for Tyke. In Rome, Will Ladislaw and his German painter friend Adolf Naumann see Dorothea on her honeymoon with Casaubon. Will visits Dorothea while a jealous Casaubon is at the Vatican Library. Will reveals to Dorothea that Casaubon's work, The Key to All Mythologies, is failing because Casaubon can't read German and is unaware of recent theological developments. Fred, having failed his university exam, tries to sell a horse to make money but the horse injures itself. Fred confesses to Caleb Garth, who realizes he and his wife must use their savings, intended for their son Alfred's apprenticeship, to cover Fred's debt. They also consider asking Mary for some of her savings. Fred falls ill with a fever and Dr. Wrench misdiagnoses him. Rosamond calls in Lydgate, who corrects the diagnosis of typhoid fever and administers proper treatment, earning Mrs. Vincy's gratitude. Dorothea returns from her honeymoon to find Celia engaged to Sir James. Casaubon, now ill, is diagnosed by Lydgate with a heart condition that could be fatal if he doesn't reduce his workload. When Mrs. Bulstrode asks Lydgate about a rumor that he and Rosamond are engaged, he decides to avoid the Vincys' house unless professionally necessary. Seeing Rosamond's distress, Lydgate realizes he loves her and proposes. As Mr. Featherstone's death approaches, his relatives gather around, hoping to secure their inheritance. Irritated, he tells them he has already made his will. Mary, serving as his caregiver, is asked one night to burn one of his 2 wills. She refuses even when offered £200 as a bribe. Shortly after, Featherstone dies. His will reveals that all his wealth and land go to his illegitimate son, Joshua Rigg, a stranger to the Middlemarch community. The Vincys are outraged. Mr. Vincy tries to retract his approval of Rosamond and Lydgate's engagement, concerned about Lydgate's financial situation. Political upheaval grips England with the push for electoral reform. Mr. Brooke buys the local progressive newspaper, The Pioneer, and hires Will Ladislaw as editor-in-chief, despite Casaubon's opposition. Brooke faces accusations of hypocrisy for running on a progressive platform while being a harsh landlord. He hires Caleb Garth to manage Sir James's property, Freshitt, and Tipton, saving the Garths from financial ruin. Fred Vincy returns from university with a degree but does not want to join the church. John Raffles, the stepfather of Joshua Rigg, arrives in Middlemarch seeking money from Rigg, who dismisses him due to Raffles' abusive past and alcoholism. Lydgate, back from his honeymoon, discusses medical reform with Dorothea, who pledges £200 a year to the new hospital. Will and Lydgate become friends, and Will often visits Lydgate and Rosamond's home. Casaubon, in declining health, asks Dorothea to promise to fulfill a request after his death. Believing he wants her to complete the key to all mythologies, Dorothea hesitates but plans to agree. The next morning, she finds Casaubon dead before she can give her answer. Mr. Brooke and Sir James discover a clause in Casaubon's will stating that Dorothea will lose her property if she marries Ladislaw. Celia informs Dorothea, who is shocked and for the first time considers her feelings for Will. Mr. Brooke gives a speech for his election campaign but is pelted with eggs by the crowd. Fred Vincy enlists Fairbrother's help to determine if Mary would support him in becoming a clergyman, but Mary would not. Raffles returns to Middlemarch and begins blackmailing Bulstrode about his past involving Will. After Casaubon's death, Dorothea lives with Celia and her new baby at Freshitt. Will informs Dorothea that he is leaving Middlemarch. While Caleb and his assistant Tom survey land for a new railway, a mob of farm workers opposed to the project attacks them. Fred helps defend Caleb and Tom, and Caleb offers Fred an apprenticeship, much to Mr. Vincy's dismay, as it renders Fred's education a waste. Rosamond suffers a miscarriage after horseback riding against Lydgate's advice. Deeply in debt, Lydgate sells their silverware, which angers Rosamond. She informs Will about Casaubon's will, stipulating that Dorothea will lose her inheritance if she marries Will. Meanwhile, Raffles continues to torment Bulstrode, revealing that Bulstrode, as a young man, was involved in a scheme with Mr. Dunkirk, a pawnbroker dealing in stolen goods. After Dunkirk's death, Bulstrode married his widow, who wanted to find her estranged daughter Sarah, who was Will's mother, to give her inheritance. Bulstrode bribed Raffles to falsely claim Sarah couldn't be found, securing the inheritance for himself. In the present, Bulstrode tries to atone by offering Will the inheritance, but Will refuses. When Will says goodbye to Dorothea, she realizes he loves her. Lydgate, now £1,000 in debt, tries to sell his house to Ned Plymdale, but Rosamond secretly blocks the sale. Desperate, Lydgate asks Bulstrode for money. Bulstrode refuses, advising Lydgate to file for bankruptcy and suggesting that he step down from running the new hospital. Raffles reappears in Middlemarch, very ill. Bulstrode takes him in and calls Lydgate, who diagnoses Raffles with alcohol poisoning. Bulstrode gives Lydgate £1,000. However, Bulstrode fails to properly instruct the servant caring for Raffles, leading to Raffles' death. Before dying, Raffles had told Bambridge, the local horse dealer, about Bulstrode's dark past. This gossip spreads rapidly, causing a scandal that leads people to believe Bulstrode bribed Lydgate to help kill Raffles. The scandal forces both men to depart from Middlemarch, leaving the new hospital behind. Dorothea, believing in Lydgate's innocence, gives him a check for £1,000 to clear his debt to Bulstrode. When Dorothea visits the Lydgates, she sees Will and Rosamond holding hands while Rosamond cries. Misinterpreting this, she thinks they are in love. Later, Rosamond clarifies the misunderstanding and tells Dorothea that Will loves her. Will and Dorothea finally confess their feelings for each other, though Will initially believes they cannot marry because of Casaubon's will. Dorothea assures him she will give up her fortune to be with him, despite the disapproval of her friends and family. Bulstrode leaves Middlemarch, giving his house to Fred. The novel ends with the detail that Fred and Mary marry and lead a happy, successful life. Rosamond and Lydgate remain unhappily married, and Lydgate dies at 50, feeling like a failure. Dorothea and Will move to London, where Will enjoys a prosperous political career and Dorothea finds fulfillment as a wife and mother. Let's analyze Middlemarch. In Middlemarch, characters marry for love rather than obligation, but their marriage is depicted as largely unromantic. The narrator remarks, young lovemaking, that gossamer web. Even the points it clings to are scarcely perceptible, and Mr. Brooke cynically describes marriage as, it is a noose, you know. Dorothea's marriage fails due to her youthful naivety and illusions about marrying an older man. She convinces herself that Casaubon is a great intellectual whom she can help achieve greatness, seeking to fulfill her ambitions through him, while Casaubon believes Dorothea will assist him in his life's work. He views her as a nurse and secretary, roles he considers tedious but suitable for her. His marriage proposal emphasizes, "I had an impression of your eminent and perhaps exclusive fitness to supply that need. To supply aid in graver labors and to cast a charm over vacant hours," revealing his self-centeredness. In contrast, Dorothea's response, "I am very grateful to you for loving me," shows her misunderstanding, as Casaubon never expressed love and is incapable of it. Celia reacts to their engagement, shame mingled with a sense of the ludicrous. Dorothea and Casaubon project their desires and needs onto each other rather than noticing each other's personality or feelings. Lydgate's marriage fails due to clashing personalities. Lydgate desires a trophy wife, believing Rosamond's beauty and musical talents will create a perfect retreat after his demanding days, while Rosamond seeks wealth and social prestige through an aristocratic connection, assuming Lydgate will elevate her status. Neither considers the other's true aspirations or limitations, leading to inevitable conflict. Fred Vincy and Mary Garth face significant challenges in their relationship. Mary recognizes Fred's weak character, shaped by his upbringing, but still loves him. She refuses to marry him until he reforms and takes up a respectable profession. Mary believes that things were not likely to be arranged for her peculiar satisfaction and views life very much as a comedy in which she had a proud, nay, a generous resolution not to act the mean or treacherous part. Fred, aware that Mary is not conventionally beautiful, values her true character and has loved her since childhood. He understands that he must achieve respectability before she will consider him as a husband. Their relationship thrives because Fred is willing to change, and Mary is patient enough to wait for his prosperity. In Middlemarch, both the presence and absence of money create numerous problems for the characters, playing a significant role in the social hierarchy of the community. The author highlights various ways in which financial issues can ruin lives. Fred Vincy, for example, gambles and incurs debt to the local horse dealer, Mr. Bambridge. Initially, he doesn't take this debt seriously because he relies on his father's wealth. Fred had always his father's pocket as a last resource, so that his assets of hopefulness had a sort of gorgeous superfluity about them. Of what might be the capacity of his father's pocket, Fred had only a vague notion. Was not trade elastic? This perceived financial security is actually detrimental, as Fred is unaware of his father's actual financial situation, and it leads him to irresponsible behaviors like borrowing and gambling. Consequently, Fred's debt causes him significant distress. Inheritance greed is another way money negatively impacts lives. At Mr. Featherstone's funeral, his numerous relatives gather, not to mourn but to eagerly await the reading of his will. This is highlighted when Fred Vincy bites his cheeks to hide his smile upon learning of his inheritance. When the second will is read, nullifying their expected gains, the ensuing anger reveals their horrid greed. The concept of dirty money further sheds light on the destructive power of wealth. When Lydgate faces bankruptcy, he accepts a loan from Bulstrode, unaware that this money was obtained through unethical means. Once this fact is exposed, Lydgate is embroiled in the scandal, making him a social outcast in Middlemarch. Lydgate's error is highlighted by the contrast with Will Ladislaw, who earlier in the novel had refused Bulstrode's money knowing it was tainted. "My unblemished honor is important to me. You shall keep your ill-gotten money." This highlights Ladislaw as a morally upstanding character and suggests that accepting unethical money, even out of desperation, is never justifiable. Dorothea and Caleb Garth are also examples of characters who do not give in to greed. Dorothea often expresses disdain for her wealth and ultimately marries Ladislaw, despite knowing that Casaubon's will stipulates she will lose her inheritance by doing so. This decision mirrors that of Ladislaw's grandmother, Julia, who was disowned for marrying a poor musician. Dorothea is curious about how Julia bore the change from wealth to poverty, foreshadowing her own situation later in the novel. While Dorothea never becomes impoverished, she does sacrifice considerable wealth, emphasizing the novel's theme that fulfillment and principles are more important than money. However, Dorothea's romanticization of Julia's story can be seen as ingenuous, as she has never truly faced poverty and thus underestimates the gravity of sacrificing financial security. Caleb Garth's situation further exemplifies this. The Garths are relatively poor and live modestly, which is portrayed as admirable. However, when Caleb lends Fred money and Fred cannot repay it, the Garths face serious financial strain. Caleb's generosity, while commendable, is also perilous because financial stability is crucial for survival. Ultimately, Middlemarch suggests that while rejecting greed and valuing principles over money is noble, the practical realities of financial hardship cannot be ignored. Let's analyze the symbolism of Middlemarch. The miniature portrait of Julia Casaubon instantly reminds Dorothea of Will Ladislaw because of their resemblance. Julia was Will's grandmother who, along with her children, was disinherited for loving and marrying Mr. Ladislaw, a poor, non-English man. Julia's portrait symbolizes the challenges of marriage for Dorothea, who sees Julia as someone who defied her family's wishes and suffered for it. The portrait hangs in Dorothea's bedroom at Casaubon's house, frequently reminding her of Ladislaw. Thus, the portrait also symbolizes Will, with whom Dorothea has fallen in love, representing her possible choice to forego wealth for love. When Ladislaw comes to say goodbye, Dorothea offers him the portrait as a farewell gift. Ladislaw's refusal, stating he has no need for the past, suggests that a future together is still possible. The new hospital in Middlemarch was established by Nicholas Bulstrode, who funds it, and Tertius Lydgate, who is the medical director. Their goal is to elevate medical care in the town. They also plan to conduct research and eventually open a medical school. Lydgate's approach to medicine is innovative, from his prescriptions and treatments to his refusal to charge for certain lucrative procedures, which sets him apart from his wealthier peers. Lydgate's focus on affordable care means that his patients are primarily from the working class. The hospital is intended to be a state-of-the-art facility in a provincial area resistant to technological progress and reform. The local resistance to change makes it difficult for the new hospital to thrive. None of the Middlemarch doctors are willing to work there, forcing Lydgate to hire staff from outside the area. Eventually, the financial scandal that forces both Bulstrode and Lydgate to leave Middlemarch leads to the hospital's failure. The old infirmary then absorbs it. The new hospital symbolizes the challenge of progress in a community wary of reform. While Bulstrode, Lydgate, and Dorothea have high hopes for the institution, most townspeople are too entrenched in traditional ways to appreciate its potential benefits. Hope you comment, share and subscribe for more videos.